Hey everybody, we're back. We're here today. This is going to be fun. Um, Guest today on the show is Brian Max, and Brian. Before I let you introduce yourself and take over the show, I wanted to tell you I have this weird skill. It's I'd say about 90 to 93% of people I know. I can tell them how we met, where we first connected, and all these things. And so I know where we met, and I know whether or not we've made out. And I know we haven't made out, but I can't for the life of me figure out how we connected. And I know over the last couple of years, I've chased you a little bit because I want to be your friend. I did a marketing stunt at Monterey Car Week. I emailed you and asked if you were going to be there. You said you weren't, and I think I've emailed you once or twice when we were both in California at the same time. But randomly, like a month ago, you reached out to me and we had like our first real kind of like Zoom conversation. We've had a couple and they've been an absolute delight. So I'm grateful that we connected and stuff, but I still can't remember how I initially came across you, but I've been following you for probably like 4 or 5 years now. So I gave up trying to figure it out, but I'm grateful you're here. Tell people why I'm mildly obsessed with you, or at least I have been for a while. Introduce yourself and tell people who you are.
Oh boy. Well, there we go. So that's part of my bio. So
read it. I made it easier.
I am a championship-winning racing driver. This is true. Auto writer and on-camera presenter for print, online, and television media on the subject of cars. And being a racing driver, I'm always interested in how cars drive, not interested in their features or how buttons work or how much cargo capacity they have. I'm interested in how they drive and how they make you feel.
Well, it's interesting you say that because, so you've got, I don't know how many videos you have on YouTube. We'll just say hundreds. But I've watched a slew of them. And one of the things that really drew me to your video, so I'm like a closet car person. I love cars, but I couldn't tell you about engines or suspensions or any of those things. I like the aesthetic of cars. I like the way they look. I like how they make you feel. And I've always been drawn to your videos because you take a weirdly academic approach to them, where other people are just shouting at you, all these weird features and things like that. You actually talk about, the emotional side of it, which I think is it's something that's always connected with me. So why do you do that? Is that on purpose or is that sort of by accident?
Maybe a bit of both. I mean, I'm interested in articulating more than anything how a driver interfaces with a car and then how it drives. So and also one of my strengths, because I've been teaching race driving for a long time, I'd like to think one of my strengths is the ability to break down how certain technologies may enhance a car and your ability to drive it, and also to break down how a car actually handles, because any car here in the club I can take to its limits and beyond and really explore it. Not that I necessarily want to do that on public roads, but I'm capable of doing that, and I can discuss how it handles at or beyond its limits. And I know certainly on YouTube there are not a lot of people that have the ability to do that. There's maybe a couple of British blokes that can do that really well, and one of my Australian pals can do it really well. But in North America, there are very few that have that same skill set. And sure, anybody who's got a YouTube channel about cars loves cars. There's no question. But my strength is not in the minutia, but it is in breaking down the essentials of a car, and how it drives, how you can use it, and how it's different from the competition. And today it's very hard to find a bad car. It's sure there are some very bad cars that I would never recommend to anybody, but it's still very hard to find one of those. So my perspective is, how does this particular car work on a day-to-day basis, or if you're gonna like these cars. Let's say they were new. How do they work as a sports car, and what kind of fun can you have with them? Whereas, for example, I can show you. Right here is the new Acura NSX. And that thing is so full of technology, but it's applied in the right way that it just works. And there's no reason to break down how the electric motors work and the way that the engine and electric motor torque is distributed to all four wheels, because the car just works perfectly. But for somebody who has a little interest in cars, like you do, Saul, I can actually break that down in a way that it's understandable. And I'd like to think that's my strength. And as a result, that's my approach.
So I have like 1,000 questions for you. I want to, find out how you got into racing. I want to find out how you transitioned. But since you opened the door on technology, I'm going to throw this out here. So, my favorite cars are I'm obsessed with 70s and 80s Porsches, and those are very not technical cars. They're more just kind of like, you can fix most Porsches with like very limited tools. There's no computers and things. Now, of course, it's very different. They're very sophisticated and stuff like that. Are you a fan of these like highly technical cars, or can you appreciate both?
I like any kind of car that puts a smile on my face. It doesn't matter what it is. So, for example, my test car this week is probably the most obscene SUV available today. So it's called the Jeep Grand Cherokee Trackhawk, and you don't see many of these. So it looks like a regular Grand Cherokee, but it has the motor from the Dodge Challenger Hellcat.
So it's like 800
horsepower, like 707 horsepower from the factory. So you can go to your Jeep dealer and buy one of these things. And I mean, it's still an SUV. It's still got a very high center of gravity, so it's not a sports car. But with 707 horsepower, it's just obscene. It's so much fun.
Okay, so let's backtrack. How did you get into racing? Because you hear these stories of like, people driving go-karts as a kid and just sort of never get up. Like, how'd you get into racing?
So I didn't grow up in a racing family, although my uncle raced cars before I was born. But by the time I was born, he'd already moved to California, and obviously still loves cars. But both my parents appreciated cars in different ways. So my father just loved cars in general and had some interesting cars along the way. My mother, on the other hand, is where I got my need for speed. She was always getting speeding tickets, even into her 70s. Was always getting speeding tickets, and my in a lot of ways, my father was a key influence, and he was always buying car magazines, and that's certainly what you did in the 80s, and I devoured as much car information as I could, and so I was reading Car and Driver and Road and Track and all that stuff, and I always thought that sports car racing was really cool, and then got to a point where it was like I need to do this. So in my early 20s, I went racing. And did that for a couple of years. Just, I'd say I got my feet wet a little bit, but realized as I got deeper into motorsport that it was going to get very, very expensive, and either I was going to have to find the money some way or another. And raising sponsorship is a racing driver's number one job, and that is the most difficult aspect of it. And so I decided to move away from motor racing for a little bit, and then got married and family and all that stuff, and then later went back to motor racing. But in that time, I was also teaching race driving and teaching at performance driving schools. So by the time I went back to racing, I was completely ready to go as a racing driver, and then we were successful. So in my 10 years ago, roughly, we started a program in the States based on Honda Civics with some friends, and we were very, very successful. So, I was talking to a friend last night, and they brought somebody else into the conversation. I get introduced as a racing driver. I was like, well, how many races have you won? I'm like, I have no idea anymore. We were so successful over those few years that the trophies piled up, and I can't tell you how many races I've actually won. I know for years I had track records at various tracks, and some of those still stand. And then the most our biggest success was winning 2 national championships in the U.S. So I've done most of my racing in the U.S. and have been very successful there. My home track here in Canada, Canadian Tire Motorsport Park, I've had 3 big crashes. And my home track in the U.S. would be Mid-Ohio, and I've maybe had 1 crash there. But here, I don't think I've really. I have a checkered flag that was awarded to me, I guess, for winning a race in the early '90s at Canadian Tire Motorsport Park, or Mosport back then. But I don't really remember winning the race. I don't know, but I guess I won a race there, but certainly haven't won anything since, and certainly not in my later years. But if there's a track I know really well, it's that one. But I've had just horrible wrecks, and in fact, I've got a chipped tooth right here that I don't have fixed, just to remind me to not race in a certain championship again.
That's funny. So you say you're successful, but there's a person who goes to your YouTube channel that disagrees with you. But we can get to that. We can get to that later.
Sure.
How do you? So, well, first you sort of touched on the fact that cars have always been a passion and things like that. Do you sort of think people should follow their passions? Because like I used to have a lot of passions that I tried to turn into businesses, and one was successful, except I sort of lost my passion for it because it became work instead of like that thing that was passion. Do you like has this, obviously this worked out for you, but do you still love cars the way you would have loved cars if you were just a fan, or is this actually blossomed your love in a different way?
That's a good question. And in fact, when I'm hosting something, I ask that question of my guests who work with cars, and when it becomes your business, it certainly does change things. But I try to make time to enjoy the cars that I'm driving, and not just actually work with them. So the like all the high-end exotics, and sure, the Lamborghinis and McLarens and and Porsches, they're all really special cars, and I want to capture as much footage as I can. I really want to understand the car and all that, but oftentimes it seems rushed, and there are a huge number of cars where all I've done is drive them for the purposes of filming an episode, and then afterwards I think, oh man, I really didn't get to enjoy that car. So I try to take some time, and thankfully when I'm in California, there's some beautiful roads that are that have adult speed limits, not like here in Ontario where we've got these juvenile speed limits. So there are roads where you can actually enjoy the car legally, and they're beautiful roads, and there's no traffic. It's just beautiful. So I try to do that as often as possible. Here in being based in Toronto, it's the weirdest thing. For somebody who loves cars, you're stuck in traffic all the time, and it's not quite the same thing. But I'll take the occasion, with any test car, to leave the city and enjoy whatever that vehicle is. But what I try to do is like I said before, not get involved in the minutia of a car, because I think that for me that would take away the joy. I'm sure other people find joy in how every single button in the car works, but that's not for me. I really want to drive the car, and I want to understand some of the mechanicals that are relevant to the driving experience. So that's I think my approach with the type of content that I do on YouTube reflects the way I want to enjoy a car.
Mm-hmm. So your videos are beautifully shot. You've always seemed to find a mountainous, windy road. You've got your GoPros on the front tires. You've got like the things and stuff like that. How long does it take you to shoot one of these videos?
The beautiful ones take a couple of days to shoot everything. But if I could work on it start to finish, I could shoot and edit in probably 3 full days. But it never works that way. So I always know in advance the kind of car that I'm driving, so I can do all of my prep work and roughly formulate a script and a shot list. But then when I'm in a beautiful location, it just makes things easy to shoot. And some of my regular locations are beautiful at sunset, so it just makes my job super easy. But I'm not I never certainly didn't go to school for film or television, and learned a pile of tricks from my pal Nick, who was a professional motorsport photographer. So we met when he was shooting me when I was racing in a pro series a few years ago, and then we decided to do some YouTube stuff together, and I learned a ton from him. Technically I'm not like him, but I can approximate beautiful shots from time to time.
Mm-hmm. So I've been on your YouTube channel. Obviously, you have some YouTube videos that have 500,000 views. So, any tips or anything to share with people?
I think it might be automotive category specific. For me, the big view counts come when I drive that car early. So at a launch event or get early access to a car, that tends to drive all the search traffic. And because we're doing all the other things relatively well, we tend to on those occasions rank higher on YouTube search, and that's where the traffic comes from. So, for us in automotive, it's at least in the automotive channels, it's important to get into that car and film an episode as soon as possible. So our most popular video is the Dodge Challenger Demon, which is 840 horsepower muscle car that's optimized for drag racing, and it's the quickest accelerating car I've ever been in, and I've driven everything. It's just it. I mean, from the factory, it is a remarkably quick car, and I think that was reflected in the piece. I'm just laughing half the time because I can't believe how quick the car is. But that's it. That seems to be the trick anyway, is getting in that car early, and of course every once in a while that something goes viral and it's inexplicable, and maybe you figure it out months later, but that seems to be the trick. And with YouTube, you've got to do all the things correctly. You've got to have a good title and a good thumbnail and a decent description and the right tags. And I mean, it's almost endless, but it's part of the process. And the one thing that we have on the channel is a consistent look with our thumbnails. So, I think at least our regular viewers know what they're getting, and new viewers hopefully are discovering a different kind of channel, because it's my presentation style is not to yell and scream and get all excited about things. I'm pretty pragmatic about my approach to cars. So it's different, and on the other hand, I don't get too nerdy about a car unless it's really necessary. And this Jeep that I'm driving, there's a little bit of nerd factor to it in the way that they've had to construct portions of the Jeep. But my test car next week has some really cool technology that is only available in modern times. It's got technology that was not around 10 years ago, even 5 years ago. So it's worthy to talk about and explain. And that's when I get nerdy, so that other enthusiasts who don't have that knowledge can actually learn something.
So speaking of technology, I don't know if you saw this. I saw it this morning. I thought it was really kind of an interesting decision, but Aston Martin is releasing the DB5, the James Bond car, and they're actually putting out a James Bond version. It's going to be like $250,000 or something like that, but it's going to have the revolving license plate. It's going to have the smoke and the oil and bulletproof things and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of amazing. And I don't even know if there's a question. I think I'm just spitting it out there, but it's a really interesting way of taking old technology and making it new for people who, you mentioned this technology didn't exist. This is 40-year-old made up technology that they've actually gotten to work for real. Anyways,
well, no, that's actually worth exploring, Saul. So I've been to the current Aston Martin factory, but what they've done is they've maintained the original factory, and it's now partly a restoration center, partly a service center, partly a sales center, but that still exists today, and they restore any Aston Martin that's ever built. They can restore it there. But with what they're doing with these DB5s, there's the Bond DB5, but they've also got, I think they're doing a DB4 GT, which they are constructing, like it was constructed back in whenever the heck they were, around the 50s. And you can't license it and that sort of thing. It's more of a track car than anything else, but you can buy a brand new vintage Aston Martin and then enjoy it. And it's interesting that companies like that are around and can do these sorts of things because they've maintained those resources.
So I would be remiss if I didn't ask you what your favorite car is. So what is your favorite car? And then I'm gonna sort of like give you some observations I've noticed from watching your YouTube channel.
So I've got a number of biases based on my personal experience. So in racing, I've raced all sorts of things, but I've been very successful in front wheel drive cars. So I've got a real soft spot for a good front wheel drive car. And today the Volkswagen Golf GTI is sort of the easy answer in that space. But Honda has the Civic Type R, which is a 300 horsepower version of the Civic with a manual transmission, and it works really well. And then out of nowhere, Hyundai comes along with the Veloster N, and it's the letter N that's the key. It's to represent their tuning division at Hyundai, and it's run by the former head of BMW Motorsport. So this is a gentleman who is spent his entire career at BMW Motorsport engineering these things and in charge of the engineering teams. So the Veloster N surprised me, and it is such a fantastic front wheel drive car. I love driving the thing. It's just a blast to drive. Now, that said, I'm sitting here among some Porsches and 911s and their variants are my kind of jam, and I've had the good fortune to spend a lot of time in 911. So to me, if there's a perfect all around car, it's the 911, and I've been fortunate to drive what I consider to be the best iterations of those. So my favorite production car is what's called the GT3 RS 4-liter. So it's now they're 10 years old, and it's a very special low volume production car. And I've driven, I think, 3 of them. One in Germany, and got to take it on the Autobahn and top 300 kilometers an hour, and that was fun. And that to me is the ultimate production 911. The ultimate 911 is a car that's restored by a 911 that's restored by a company in LA called Singer Vehicle Design. So they take and if I could show it easily, I would. So they take an early 90s Porsche 911, strip it. When they're finished with it, it's got a carbon fiber body that looks like it's from the early 70s. But what they do with it is they update it mechanically. So it's got a much more powerful engine, modern suspension, modern brakes, modern tires, and then the fit and finish is just exquisite. Today for us Canadians, they're basically $1 million project if you wanted your Porsche restored in that way. And
there is one for sale for $1 million, and I think it was in Markham or somebody has one. They're looking to sell it. The Singer stuff's really gorgeous, but they've got their trademark seats, they've got all those the touches that they're gorgeous, but I don't know, like the whole $1 million thing is a little much. I don't know, like if you could even insure that. So it's I don't know, it's interesting. I love Porsche Targas. They're my favorite. I love the 80s, the Targa SCs and
Yes.
stuff like that. But I really love the most, the new 2020, the most modern one. It's so fascinating to see how far these cars have come. And they just announced that it's not 2020, 2021.
Mhm.
They just announced it like a week ago, and I've been reading all the stuff because that is my absolute favorite car, the Targa. And I don't like the 90 era Targa where it didn't have the silver bar and it was just the
Yes.
certified sunroof.
Yes.
Those are shameful. Those don't even count. But the new ones are gorgeous. But it's really interesting to see, and I'd love your opinion on this. A lot of the reviews and a lot of the reviews of Porsche in general in the last year or two, a lot of people sort of criticize them for not making sports cars anymore. They're making these sport touring cars, like they're almost too comfortable to be a sports car, but they still have 450 horsepower, can still go 260, 270. Like it's still a sports car to me, but I guess to the people in your mindset, you look at it differently.
Yeah, I certainly do. So, to me, the modern 911s, this latest generation, and even the previous one, they've gotten wider, they've gotten longer, they've gotten heavier, and still you've got that sports car like cockpit, but the driving experience is closer than ever to something like a Bentley Continental.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not they're not equivalent by any stretch of the imagination, but if you want a core sports car in the Porsche line, you kind of today you either have to look at one of the special models like a GT3, or you have to look at a Cayman or a Boxster, because the regular 911s are very much Grand Tours. They're very comfortable and they're very usable. They've basically removed a lot of the compromises that you'd normally find in a sports car, and to me, that's what combined with the size and the weight, that makes it more along the lines of a Grand Tour than a pure sports car.
It's funny because the Boxster, when it first came out, like people kind of like shat on it because it was like the poor man's Porsche. Now it's like the most closest thing to like a true sports car in the eyes of like you fancy racing people.
Well, the reality is 911 buyers today want this softer kind of experience. They don't want the compromises of a true sports car. And, that's the nature of Porsche's business today. Speaking of the Boxster, the Boxster is really what saved Porsche in the modern age, and that's what allowed them to fund the development of the Cayenne, which really changed the fortunes of the company. And now they make more SUVs than they do cars, so the nature of the company is completely changed, and thankfully they still maintain their racing activities and their hardcore sports car activities, but for the most part they are an SUV company these days.
So you're sitting in a car club. For people who don't know what that means, explain what car clubs are.
Well, this is a modern take on a club. So traditionally, a club would be centered around a certain mark, like Porsches, Ferraris, Corvettes, whatever the case is. But I'm at our club in Toronto, and it's a club for members, and so not only is there I'm sitting at a big table, and there's sofas here, and there's beverages, whatever you need, but the experience is that if you're a car enthusiast, you can jump in here, you can wash your car, you can put it up on the lift if you want to change wheels or do a brake service. I don't do that sort of thing, I'm not very mechanical, but you can do all of those sorts of things here. But it's the cars that are in the background belong to the club, and members can sign them out as you would a library book. So if you want to drive this late 80s BMW, behind me, you just sign it out and take it for a spin. The same thing with the NSX, and there's a couple of Porsches around and a vintage Mustang. So if you want that kind of experience, this is the sort of this place kind of makes sense. But for me, it's a nice place to hang out as well with some like-minded people.
Mm-hmm. So I sort of mentioned this before we went live, but I'm really close to doing a client project in the automotive space, and one of the insights that sort of helped me achieve good standing in their eyes is the I predict that we are going to have a very interesting time in the next year for the automotive industry, or cars in general, with everything that's going on with COVID. People, I believe, and no data behind this, just my own intuition, I think people are going to be working from home more often. They're going to be leaving downtown cores because they don't need to be there for work, and people are going to need cars again, and there's going to be a bit of a boom in the car industry. Do you agree, disagree? What do you sort of see the next year of like the car industry?
Well, I mean, it's worth mentioning what's happening right now, and as I understand it, car sales are off 40% from where they would have been otherwise, and that is significant. And I can only guess at that number because car makers are no longer reporting their sales numbers monthly. So they're only reporting on sales when they're required to by regulations, either in their home market or wherever. So it's going to be a while before we really understand the impact that this has had on the car business. My end of it is the enthusiast end of things. So those folks aren't really going away. Casual enthusiasts certainly might go away, but the somebody who puts fun cars, makes fun cars as a priority in their lives, this sort of thing isn't going to go away, and that's great to see. And I don't know what the impact is of all of this is going to have on sports cars and enthusiast-oriented cars, but I'd like to think that's going to increase a little bit because those buyers will still be there. I think what we're also going to see, never mind people buying cars, but I think we're going to see people hanging on to cars longer, and that really changes things because if people are buying something to hold on to it for a long time, they have to make the right choice. And those of us in the business know that there are some brands that it's a no-brainer. You buy this car, hang on to it for 10 years, maintain it, and you're gonna get every last dime out of the cost of it, and that's great. But some buyers are going to have to be really, really careful because they're, of course, today you can get 0% 7 and 8 year financing on new cars, and to me that's frightening for someone who's not in the business, because as that vehicle emerges from its warranty coverage, $3,000-$4,000 repairs can be a terrible surprise.
Yeah. So I'm reasonably new to the world of obsessive classic cars, and I've been on the hunt. I don't have $70,000, $80,000, $50,000 to put down on something. So I've been looking for something reasonable that I could toy around with, and maybe not in pristine condition. I've been looking for a Volvo P1800 and like an 80s Porsche. Haven't been able to close the deal on either. I've lost a couple auctions here and there. But one thing I've done crazy research on both these cars, and it's so fascinating to me that you buy a new car and it depreciates like crazy, but a lot of Porsche owners can literally drive a car for 4 years and almost get the exact same amount of money that they bought it for. If they buy a 20-year-old car, maybe it costs them $5,000 over that time to maintain it and service it. But these are actually classic cars, if you pick the right one, is actually almost the safest investment you could make right now with such uncertainty in the world. And it maybe, being a little hyperbolic, but
Sure.
that was very interesting to me doing the research, that how like these cars, with love and attention, actually, like, people always talk about, oh, you're going to, bury yourself in debt and stuff like that. You can actually either come out break even, or maybe, you basically, for $5,000 you had a great car for 3 years or 4 years.
Oh, that's exactly it, and that's kind of been the case for the last 10 years. I mean, we're it's going to be a different world in the collector car world, certainly going forward. But over the last 10 years, you could pick any well-chosen vintage car that has a reasonable community behind it, or a reasonable amount of interest behind it. You could do exactly that. You could buy something for reasonable amount of money. It doesn't cost you a lot to maintain or insure, because you're certainly not driving it every day. And as long as you don't, with old air-cooled 911s, their engines need rebuilding every once in a while, and as long as you don't get stuck with that during your ownership experience, it can be pretty positive.
Well, that's like $15,000, I think, or something.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So we have a lot in common. I touched on it a little earlier. Obviously, love of cars, different sort of scales on the spectrum and stuff like that. But bigger than that, people love us or hate us. And I sort of joked about, you've got a couple comments on YouTube of people, we'll just say they're colorful comments. How do you deal with like people kind of hating on you? Because it's so funny. I know with myself, there's very few people who are in the middle. It's either like I'm a good guy, or it's just like, fuck you.
There's a line somewhere, and on YouTube, it's inevitable. I mean, everybody hears about it and whatever. But for example, I've got a regular, and I haven't banned this guy from my channel just because it's fun to mess with him. But every once in a while, he'll show up claiming that my racing career didn't exist, and that I've done nothing in racing. Well, meanwhile, I've won.
You got to show him your tooth.
No, that was a bad crash. That ended that race pretty badly. But it's all available on Google. I mean, it's really easy to find. Not only the national championships that I've done, but also all the pro racing that I've done, and it's there. And this gentleman rolls in on YouTube once a week or once every 2 weeks, and claims that no, I'm not a racing driver and whatever. And I simply remind him that he can't use Google, and leave it at that. So I draw the line at really hateful stuff, and that's typically indicative of someone who's got a whole pile of problems that I can't resolve, and they need some help. So when it gets to the point that it's truly hateful, they're banned, and I don't want to see them again. And sometimes they find my other social and whatever, because they've got nothing else better to do with their time and whatever. But that I will share I think the best troll story in my experience, and it was some really hateful stuff on YouTube, and it was directed at me. So I replied to whoever this was, and I said, I'll pay you $100 if you say that to my face, like in person. So this dialogue went on for a little while, and I'm like, $100 is here if you're gonna say these same words to me, to my face. And the conversation went on, and I said, well, I guess you're not a man of your word and whatever. And he went on, and I said, look, I travel a lot. I'll show up to your place, and I'll give you the opportunity to say this to my face. So the gentleman gave me his address, and I verified it. So what I did, I've never been, and I should go when I go to LA. But what I did was send him a glitter bomb in the mail.
That's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Couple more questions, then I'm going to give you your day back. You're in the process of writing a book, and the theme of the book is really fascinating. I'd love you to sort of share it with people.
So you and I both enjoy Rolex timepieces.
Yes.
And my interest, I've had a casual interest in timepieces over my lifetime, and nothing serious. But the Rolex Daytona is named after the 24 Hours of Daytona sports car race. It's not named after the Daytona 500 or the NASCAR oval track where it takes place. It's named after the 24-hour sports car race. So being in the racing world, a number of my friends have won the race. And when you win the race, you are awarded a special Rolex Daytona timepiece. And it's part of the ceremony. When you win on the podium, they present you the watch, and it's in a special box, and it has a special inscription on the back indicating that you are a winning driver of this race. So a number of my friends wear the watches. Some aren't into watches at all. They don't care. But over the years, I'd heard so many interesting stories behind the watch that I started collecting stories. And got a few stories in, and was sitting at my desk going like, what the heck am I going to do with these? I think I was at the point where it was too much material. It was so good that it didn't make sense for a magazine anymore. It didn't make sense for a digital story, and came to the conclusion pretty rapidly that it needed to be a book. So since then I've interviewed 150 drivers or so who have won the race, and have stories going back to 1964 with Mario Andretti's first Daytona race. He didn't win that year, obviously, but he still has his Rolex Daytona from when he won in the 70s. I've interviewed the 1968 winner who was driving for the Porsche factory team. Let's see. What's challenging now with this project of a book is finishing up the photography necessary. So generally we do a lot of photography of the winners and their watches, but we can't quite do that right now in times of quarantine. So that's the real challenge. But there are so many great stories that have never been told. Nobody's ever done this before, and I thought it was fascinating, with a casual interest in watches and a serious interest in sports car racing, and it's been an amazing experience. Meeting racing drivers who I admired when I was a kid, and watched, having seen them race on television. I think one of my most recent interviews was with Danny Sullivan, who's famous for spinning while leading the Indy 500 and then coming back to win the race. But I don't think he quite knows it yet, but I think he's got the most unique Rolex Daytona from the race. And I don't think he quite knows it yet, but at some point we'll have that discussion.
That's cool. Okay. Last question. I kind of want your job. So everyone says, "Oh, Saul, you've got the coolest job in the world. You do marketing stunts and almost get arrested and things like that." But I just want car companies to give me cars for like a week. How do I get on like the press list and stuff like that?
Well, I could be cynical
I just be your sidekick?
I get that offer on a weekly basis, Saul. So, right now what's actually happening is automotive media outlets in Canada are contracting because, as you know, advertising dollars have been cut significantly. So the traditional media outlets where you'd have a written story, a written review of a car, or whatever the case is, they're all contracting right now. So I'm fortunate to have a website that does okay, and a YouTube channel which does reasonably well. But it's an unusual world, and there are plenty of folks who do review cars just for the kicks, and do a great job at regurgitating press releases, and will never tell you how a car drives. So if it's possible for them, Saul, it's possible for anyone, even you.
Okay, good. Actually, one more thing. I'm curious, sort of your take on this. Being like a race guy, or at heart, and actually racing and stuff. Where do you line? Oh, actually, two more things. Then I'll let you go. I have a hard stop. I got to call at noon.
Okay.
But two more things. One, are you disappointed seeing more and more manufacturers dropping manual transmission from their product lines, especially on some high end race cars or sports cars?
I think my answer is no, because as someone who does drive on track a lot, these automated transmissions, these gearboxes are so sophisticated that you can't shift a manual. You don't have better control. So like this NSX here, it works better the way it was originally designed. It doesn't necessarily work better as a manual transmission. Now, if you're talking about a vintage 911 or a brand new Mazda Miata, it was engineered for a manual transmission. And when it's engineered that way, not as an add-on, Porsche kind of screwed up the last generation of 911, where they designed it for the PDK, the dual clutch automated transmission. And then the manual was an afterthought. Well, the first iteration of the manual 911 of the previous generation was a bit of a disaster. Then they fixed it, and now they've promised
991.1.
That's right.
991.2. Yeah.
Yes. So they've promised to keep producing manual transmissions, and they do a great job at that. But when I drive McLarens, they're engineered for their dual clutch, and they work great as a dual clutch car. I think where manuals are disappearing is in segments like sports sedans, where it's not going to work as well as it used to be. When BMWs had a naturally aspirated inline 6-cylinder engine in most of the range, you could get a 3 Series or a 5 Series with a manual transmission, and that drivetrain and the driving experience really worked. Now, the engines are smaller. They may be 4-cylinder with smaller displacement, and they're turbocharged, and that doesn't necessarily work, and it's not as rewarding to drive. So they drive better with some type of automated transmission. So ultimately, my answer is no, but there are still plenty of great cars that are available with manual transmissions.
Okay, last question. And I should have asked you this 45 minutes ago when it actually was relevant, but I've really enjoyed this conversation. On your YouTube channel, you sort of have an expertise in supercars, exotics, whatever you want to call them, and then you also do a lot of reviews of like everyday cars, like a Nissan Leaf electric and things like that. But you don't seem to do too much in the middle, so it's either high end or everyday. I assume that's by design. So it's a two-part question. How did you sort of develop your expertise in supercars, and what is the thought process in what you review? Is it what's available, or do you actually seek out certain things?
It's a bit of a mix. So, to me, the high end supercars and hypercars are always a treat, and in particular, I found that with Bentley, for example, a lot of Bentley buyers will drop in on these reviews and ask thoughtful questions. So it's nice having that kind of experience. The same thing with McLaren buyers. I can navigate them through a decision-making process. Should I choose this model or that model? And that's rewarding. And driving the cars, that's a heck of a lot of fun, because they're just beautiful. They're quick. They do all the That's totally fine. So that you may see an Alfa Romeo 4C roll out behind me. That's one of the club cars, and that's a cool little car. The other reason I will drive something like a mid-size crossover is because I get those questions from people. I'm looking at buying a mid-size crossover. What should I buy? And for me, I need to be able to answer those questions. So in the fall or through the winter, I drove the Honda CRV, which I would never normally drive, and the Toyota RAV4, because those are two key cars that people buy in the midsize crossover segment. So that's really it. But I'd love to have the time to drive everything that I want, but it never works that way. And certainly right now, not every test car is available in Canada. A lot of the test fleets have been cut back.
Yeah. All right, Brian, this has been an absolute delight. Please, tell people how to get in touch with you, how they can follow you on YouTube. Please, use this time to basically get people to give you money in some way.
Well, first, Saul, thanks for having me. It's been a lot of fun, and I always enjoy spending time with you. I'm thankfully, my last name is so unique. I'm Brian Makse everywhere on social, so it's really easy. And if anybody out there likes cars, then subscribe on YouTube. My Instagram is a lot of behind the scenes and my other interests, which are cigars and watches and architecture, and a little bit of behind the scenes with the car stuff. And for me, that's always fun. But I'm easy to find. Brian Makse on every social platform.
And Makse is spelled Makse for people who are listening to the podcast. Brian, thank you so much.
Saul, thank you very much for having me, and I have to say thanks for having me, and as always, it's a pleasure speaking with you.